year. Also look at property shares in Hong Kong today. Now, there's been a lot of concern about a bubble forming in this sector. Residential property prices have gained 30% this year, while gains in luxury property have topped 40%. Now, our next guest says to determine a bubble, you've got to look at affordability, and he thinks in Hong Kong's case, prices are still reasonable at the mass market level. Peter Churchouse is chairman of Portwood Capital, joining us now live from Hong Kong. Peter, fantastic to have you with us today. Let me ask you a straight-out question. In your view, is there a property bubble or an asset bubble in Hong Kong?
Well, there's certainly the risk of one developing, but we're not quite there yet. And the reason I say that is really based on measures of affordability in housing in Hong Kong. Typically, when you get affordability being stretched beyond certain levels, then we're clearly in a bubble. We're not in that position right now. Affordability index that I've been measuring for about 30 years now is actually running about the long-term average. And that's largely because interest rates are at record low levels. So really interest rates is keeping affordability low in a good shape right now, and therefore we're in a position where we're not really facing a bubble in that regard, at least.
Peter, if we're not there yet, if there's no bubble yet, and obviously banks and governments have quite a fair bit in their arsenal and at their disposal to try and contain any asset bubbles from forming, why then do you believe, certainly in the Hong Kong market, there is such a fear that we are in the midst of a property bubble?
Quite frankly, I think most central banks and central political authorities around the world are very nervous about property bubbles developing, because let's face it, it's the property bubble in the Western markets which got the world into the mess we're in now. So I think they're very leery about having too much liquidity pushing property markets up. And a market that's up 28 or 30% in the past 9 months or so certainly is sending a signal that things are getting a little bit hot. So I can expect to see that central banks in this part of the world at least will be acting to cool down the property markets going forward over the next 6 months or so. And we've seen signs of that from the Hong Kong government, from the Singapore government, and even some signals coming out of China.
Peter, I'd like to join the conversation now. We do have a land auction happening at the end of this year. This would be the first one for this financial year. What other measures do the government need to do to help and cool down on what's happening here?
Well, what they've done already is started to lean on the banks to tighten up lending conditions to the residential market, particularly to the luxury end of the market. Secondly, I think a lot of people are expecting that the government should actually increase the land supply. Property construction or residential construction is pretty much at record low levels in Hong Kong. We're producing less than half of the long-term average amount of flats that we normally produce over the last 15 years. So supply is tight, liquidity is available, the economy is recovering. So you've got the seeds of a bubble there for sure. So I think the supply side could be a thing to look out for over the next 6 or 9 months.
All right, so the seeds of the bubble are certainly there. I was looking at your affordability chart, and we are quite a ways away from that 97, the peak levels we saw there. How quickly do you expect us to get there?
Well, put it this way, I think the government's going to start to control the rate of increase to some extent going forward over the next 6 months. If it was uncontrolled, I think we could see 30 or 40% pickup in prices next year. Given that I think there will be some controls put in place, I expect that upside to be more in the region of 15 to 20%, which would still leave affordability pretty good. We will still not be at those bad levels that we were at back in the late 90s.
Peter, just very, very briefly, because we are almost out of time, can you define for us an asset bubble?
Well, to me, in housing, it comes to affordability. When you are stretched, where your income level is way out of line with the house prices. In the UK, for example, the typical long-term average is average house price 3.4 times, 3.6 times household income. That got up to nearly 6 times in the UK a couple of years ago. That clearly is a bubble. We're nowhere near at that kind of level here right now. Cost of servicing a mortgage on your typical entry-level flat in Hong Kong is still very, very affordable given household income.
All right, Peter, I need to jump in there, otherwise we'll be interrupted by the break. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to Emily Chan also. We'll have much more in the second hour of Cash Flow for you right after this. Stick around.